Yay. Oh, there is a wasp. Um, Welcome back to Archetypos, my podcast. I'm so excited because today I have Melanie Piazza, who is the founder and creator of Family Village Co-op, which is a really amazing um, business slash so much more than just a business here in Denver slash Colorado. So I'm gonna hand it over to you. If you want to just share a little bit about yourself, a little bit about Family Village Co-op, I would love to hear.
Great. Yeah, so I arrived in Colorado 10 years ago when my husband and I had our first kid. And so um, I was born and raised in Seattle, went to school in California, moved to Southern California when my husband was interested in being a filmmaker. And then again, we had our daughter and moved to Colorado just looking for a different way of raising our kid. And I've got family in Seattle. My husband's from Northwest New York, New Jersey area. We have really close family friends in Kansas. So we decided to move where we could kind of get to everybody, but also have kind of a small town environment. So we live in Longmont. Um, yeah, and should I just go into the business?
Yeah, so I'm curious how old your kiddos are now. And then yes, I'm curious to hear how you started a Family Village Co-op.
Yeah. So my daughter is almost 12 and my son is 8. And really, they are the very reason that my business Family Village exists. We had moved to Colorado again 10 years ago, and soon after, my mom was diagnosed with a terminal illness. Still lived in the Seattle area, and we moved her in with us. My son was born the day that she arrived in Colorado, and we spent the first 6 months taking her to and from ERs, and it was me and my toddler and my infant, and got to spend some amazing time with her um, through end of life. But many days we would be driving in to the hospital, and I would think to myself, oh my god, this is what it means when they say it takes a village to raise a family, and I don't have one. So we moved here without knowing anybody, and we had it started to make some friends, but nothing that felt like this is the way people we can reach out to and say, can you take my kids while I go to the hospital? So I did all the things like researching, are there senior center things for mothers who are taking care of their own elders but they have kids where like, was there anything out there for someone in my position? And there wasn't. And so I ended up finding a little yoga studio, prenatal kind of birth support organization in Longmont that had a little space for support groups because I was losing my ever living mind. And it was the first time I left my kids with anybody that wasn't somebody I knew. There was a little childcare space, and it was on the other side of the wall of where my support group was happening. So I could hear the crying and the screaming of my own children, but I was in a safe space where I could talk about how hard it was. And I knew somebody else was in charge of my kids. And that was the first time it felt like I can rely on someone else. They're okay. They're okay in someone else's hands. And I'm not okay if I'm not taking care of myself. And soon after that, for various reasons, that site closed. And to be honest, I think I went into something that could only be described as rage because I felt like there is nothing to support families out there. How is this possible that we hear over and over again, it takes a village to raise a family, and that means nothing unless you have resources or a lot of family that have available time and energy to help you take care of your kids. So I got a bunch of moms together that had been going to that little venue and just sort of brainstormed. What is it that we really want? Do we want a place just like this? Do we want something different? And really what it all came down to was we wanted a place where we could go without a time constraint, without, show up at a certain time for a class, because we all know kids fall asleep in the car. Now, what do? Do you keep the kids sleeping while you sit and miss your class? Or do you bring your kid in knowing they're going to be in a terrible mood and nobody's going to really want to care for them? So we felt like a place that would be just show up in whatever condition you're in, whatever condition your kids are in, and just take care of your own needs. The business really was created out of this idea of home away from home, right? Like, I need to be in community. I need to be with other people. I need somebody else watching my kids, but I don't want to be alone and I don't want to be thinking about chores all the time. So for me, it was really this refuge is I think really what I wanted and what a lot of the moms that were in it with me wanted. So we got real creative and thrifty as moms get really good at doing. And we figured out a formula for a cooperative model. So the idea was, what kind of business structure is this going to be? And I knew I didn't want to own it outright. I didn't want to be 100% responsible for, and I also knew that I didn't have everything it took to do something that had never been done before, and that collectively we would be a lot better off. So we created it as a cooperative corporation. And the premise was you would become a member, and own a share of the business, and then be able to use the space based on a certain amount, however much money you wanted to put in, however many childcare hours you needed, is how we sustained ourselves. So that was in 2018. And we learned a lot. There were a lot of real hard lessons and a lot of really beautiful lessons. But we're now in 2 spaces and we're opening a third location next month in Fort Collins. So Boulder and Denver and Fort Collins.
Yeah. So I met you at the Denver location because that's
Yep.
where I live. And so one of the kind of creative and thrifty things that you've done is like the spaces that you're choosing are multi-use spaces. Is that right?
Yeah.
So can you speak a little
Yeah.
bit to that piece?
Yeah. So I'll back up a little bit. When we first opened in 2018, we started in a co-working space in Longmont. That was they had just taken over a third floor of a building, and they hadn't had specific direction as to exactly how they were going to use the space. And it was one of those beautiful things where a friend of mine said, "Hey, you're looking to start this business, and talk to this guy. He knows a lot about entrepreneurship." I didn't know anything, and expected to get some advice from him. Instead, he said, "Why don't you try this here?" So we actually opened in that co-working space and we're there for just under a year. And then financially, it wasn't the right fit for us. We needed to have a much tighter budget. We had charged a really embarrassingly low amount when we started because we were all in this position of moms can't afford much and we don't spend money on ourselves unless it's for our kids indirectly or whatever. So that's some of the hard lessons we learned. So we moved temporarily, we thought, into a church space in Longmont because it was a lot more affordable. And we thought we're going to just get ourselves regrouped here, get our sales up, and then we'll find another professional space. And I say professional kind of in quotes because that's what we thought we needed to survive, is a real, professional atmosphere. And it turned out moving to that church was one of the best things we could have done, because what we realized is, first of all, it created a more of a home-like atmosphere with separate rooms, and we could create different energies for, okay, this is a good resting room, this is a good co-working room. And then we also realized churches, because so churches can't charge a lot of money, they're nonprofit, and they are also in a position of having space that's open all week long for the most part. And they're interested in supporting families. The world of religion has changed a lot, and there's a lot of modern families who are not interested in churches as they have been. And churches are trying to find new ways to serve families that don't necessarily show up on Sundays or even believe the way they do. And so it turned out to be this win-win situation where this was a church that was hoping to support families without any religious expectations on them. And then we were looking to use space that really loved us. So that was kind of the magic that started at that point, where we realized the unprofessional, quote unquote, part of what we were doing was what made people feel safe and comfortable in our spaces, instead of being in a corporate a little bit more cold and sterile environment, being in a place that felt more homey and warm. A win-win. And we were very resourceful. We had all of our own furniture. So we came into spaces that this church wasn't using and made them feel really warm and inviting and comfortable for even the church's use and other organizations that they supported. And so that's kind of become part of our bread and butter, is that we're not interested in building buildings. We're not interested in starting with a clean slate. We like walking into spaces and seeing what they have and the energy that they bring into a space and the furnishings they have, and melding them with the things that we bring into the spaces to make them multi-use. So these become spaces that are used almost all of the time rather than just sitting vacant half the time.
I'm actually curious because when I met you at your Denver location, which is the Unity Spiritual Center, is that the right
Yep.
name? Yeah, yeah.
Yep. Yep.
That is one of the things that really surprised me. I was like, oh my gosh, it's just like a big house with like really cute like furnishings and decorations, honestly. So
Yeah.
like with Unity, did you also like co-create the space or did they?
Yeah. Yeah. So Emily Waldeck, who is one of our co-founders, we call her our zhuzher. She's just magical at taking spaces and things and making what might look like it's old and tired and making it somehow look new and comforting and exciting. So so we went with that particular church, we went through all the spaces and identified this works for us, this doesn't work for us. Most of it was stuff that was just, as they often are in churches, sitting for decades.
Mhm.
Maybe someone would use them as a chair to sit in, but there was no thought to why is it this particular chair. It was just a hand me down because that's the way churches operate. And so we went through and identified there's a lot of stuff here that we can use, and then there's a lot of stuff that takes up space that isn't comfortable, that isn't is a vibe that doesn't work. And then we worked with them to pass on the things that weren't going to work and then brought in our things to kind of combine with the things that they had. So there's a lot of furniture that we brought in, but there's a lot of things that were already there that we just made use of.
Oh my gosh, I love. So I just finished reading Braiding Sweetgrass, and this has just such a flavor of like symbiosis and mutuality and like what
Yeah.
is that like frugal saying? It's like use it up, do gosh, whatever. It's some saying about like using what you have, but in like a really creative way.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and I especially like the piece too, where there is like you are also helping the church like with their needs and like their spaces as well.
Yeah.
Um, so I
Yeah.
think
Yeah, we always say we're looking for the win-win-win. We're not just looking for us to win and you to win, but like how does it take it to that next level of we're all getting something more? And I would say that the event that I met you at, the Better Together event, is literally a win-win-win because that was run by Heidi, who's our director in that space, whose wife is the minister at that church. So it's already kind of an easy, we're a connected thing. But she put that together and it truly benefited the village because people got to know about our what we do and our space. It benefited the church because people got to know. I mean, one of the things I will say is we are very particular about the churches that we connect with because we are not interested in places that are judging anybody that walks through the doors. We ourselves are not a religious organization. And so we don't want to be in spaces where there's any form of judgment or, we swear. We're women that like to swear, and so we need to
that
be in
rage
spaces.
piece.
Outrage, yes. So we need to be in spaces that that are okay with who we are. Again, like we want people to walk in as they are, and we as an organization want to be able to walk in as we are. So anyway, so it is important the churches that we work with, but it helped that church, that organization, spiritual center, I know is what they like to call, because church gives bad connotations, but Unity Spiritual Center, they benefited because people got to hear about what they were doing. And there were several people who came that went to the service the next day on Sunday. And all of the vendors that came and got to, again, get to know both the village and unity, we also got to know each other, and we also got to dream into a bigger world for all of the individual things that everybody's doing. And that's a lot of what this business wants to do. Is it's we kind of treat it like it's its own entity, because it feels like it is, right. We're shepherding it, but it's this thing that wants to do something for the world, and that is not just benefiting us and the moms and the dads that walk through our doors, but through touching anybody else that comes through our doors, and supporting organizations that, want a bigger and a better world. So that comes from this idea that, like, we don't need to start from scratch. We don't need to have a whole freaking new buildings built for us. Churches don't need that. They need to utilize what they have. One thing, churches have, because of their tax exempt status, is real estate, and real estate is expensive, and real estate is one of the biggest uh, uh, roadblocks to entrepreneurship, because corporations own real estate, and corporations are not interested at the end of the day in how you as an individual business do, but how their building does, and at the end of the day what their shareholders think of it. So being in that world of, these are churches who have their mission and their purpose in the world, but they also have spaces that can do more than just having church services. So again, it was an accident, right? Like, we ended up in a church space because someone said, hey, this is available, and it's used to be a used to be a preschool, it's available, and that's how we got into the first church that we were in. But it was the best thing we could have done for this business, for sure.
I love this idea, or like what you are sharing, because it is an example of, like, I think a particular quality of relationship that we really don't experience in the West at all, or a lot. Like, I think a lot of people have an idea of like community, or like what it would mean to be in community, but it ends up feeling like really hard or really disappointing, or it's like, oh, like I actually have to put effort into this relationship. Like, it turns out I don't have a lot of bandwidth. But I
Right.
think what you're describing is like community, when it's done right, it like really proliferates really quickly. Like, relationships create new relationships, which sustain existing relationships. And all of a sudden, like, there's all this redundancy and abundance and proliferation and
Yeah.
expansion and connection that is happening. Um,
Yeah.
and this idea of like the win-win-win, it makes me think of like the whole is actually greater than the parts.
Correct.
Um, and I also love what you said about the business like feeling like its own entity. I think there's a lot of like that sense as well. It's like, oh, all of a sudden things are like coming alive that like we would normally, not think of as living things, or like there is this quality of like life force in what we're doing.
Yeah. 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 And I think this is where, in the world that we've been raised in, right, that we're starting to evolve now out of, but it's this idea that, we as an individual human have to put on all these different hats, and we have to show up to work and be a certain person, and have to show up for our family and be a certain person. We have to show up in our social lives and be a certain person, show up politically and be a certain person, spiritually. It's all these like separate parts of ourselves. And I think that's where a lot of things in society have gone wrong, because we aren't necessarily bringing those same values and living into them in every aspect of our lives. And so for us, again, that was another case of the entity being its own thing when we decided to become a co-op, because my husband and I were on a date. We never went on dates, and we were on a date in Boulder, and there was this I don't think it's there anymore, but this organization called the Impact Hub that had all kinds of like lectures series about like cool things. And they happened to have one called the New Economy. And we had no idea what it was, but we went and sat there and listened to them talk about co-ops, and how co-ops are really the way of the future, because they are about creating community wealth. They're not about individual wealth. They're about the whole. They're about sharing ideas and all these things. And that happened literally on accident. And that's, that's how it happened, is these things that you expect, I'm going to just learn something cool maybe. And it turns into, oh, this is precisely where I needed to be.
Mhm.
Um, but I think, so much that we were getting in terms of feedback and advice and guidance around what it was going to take to make this business, one, exist, and two, thrive, were the opposite of what we needed. The
Interesting.
opposite of what we needed was a business plan. We did not need a business plan. We just needed a
Did you
vision.
never create a business plan?
We created a, what is it called? There's this business plan that's like a one pager, and it's got all these boxes on it, and uh, short business. I can't remember what it's called. We only did that because we needed to it with our lawyers to create our bylaws. We
Okay.
needed to have a business plan. But we thought about, okay, we're gonna have to do this. We started to look at building decks, and all of a sudden it was like, no, we just need to do it. We don't need to tell people what we need. Now, we didn't go after bank loans, right? Like we didn't look for investors. So those are things that typically are required to sell your idea to somebody who would be in putting money into what you're doing. We didn't do that, and you can argue one way or the other that, that might have made it harder for us because we didn't have any capital to start off with. But at the same time, we didn't have to change who we were to meet somebody else's needs or expectations. And we didn't have this massive amount of debt that we had to work against to really become the priority of the business rather than what we were actually doing. But so we didn't need that. We didn't need the professional space. We didn't need to have a 6 month, 1 year, 3 year, 5 year plan. We didn't need to have a strategic plan in writing. Um, Again, there have been places where those things have been helpful to have, like including asking for grant money, right? There are ways that what you're doing has to be put on paper. But I mean, it never would have opened. We had the concept figured out in February of 2018, and our doors were open in June because all we had to do was get the furniture, move the furniture in, put some posts out, and get the damn doors open. And we did. Now, again, did we suffer financially for a while? Sure. Like the leaders did not get paid for quite a long time. But we were getting so much out of it because we were all moms losing our minds with our kids at home. And suddenly we didn't have to take care of our kids all day long because as we were building the business, we had hired somebody who was going to be the childcare provider for the business. And so we were getting free childcare for that first year. Um, so again, like I think and I was saying all of this because of the way that we have to like isolate the parts of ourselves in the world. And I think because out of necessity, I was a broken woman trying to figure out how to live my life. I didn't have the capacity to be anything other than what I was, the mess that I was. And most of the other moms were in that position. So we walked into it with this like, we're just going to figure it out because we know we can, because this vision is so clear and strong. There's no way it's not going to happen. And we don't have to know all the answers as to how. All we have to do is walk towards it, with all of our messy selves. And, again, now in the place of, we're a business that attracts a lot of entrepreneurs because there are a lot of them moms working from home, running their business, starting a business, dreaming up a business, where we can start to help show that it actually is okay to run a business that doesn't look professional, that doesn't require that you might need to attend to kids in the back of your Zoom meeting because they're having a hard time. That's not separating the parts of ourselves, that's bringing them all into one place. um, and I think that's what people are longing for, is real, this is who I am, this is my real life. If the pandemic did anything good, it was show people how many different hats we're wearing all at the same time. And do we really need to change them out? Can we just have them all on at the same time in all the spaces that's what we hope to get to, a place where it's okay to have a screaming kid in the middle of a boardroom, right? Like that, it's
Yeah.
okay.
I think that's really healing. And I am like remembering something that you have on your website where you describe it as equal parts childcare, co-working, and community. And I'm glad that you brought it back around to this, like instead of compartmentalizing our identity, just being able to integrate it, because I think the other thing that literally is a chronic issue in our culture right now is everyone is so overworked and like so either in burnout or like on the verge of burnout. And I think part of that is the like energy it requires to make those transitions and to keep the other parts at bay, as opposed to just like there's this sense of like how much energy is freed up when we don't have to move through the world in this like rigid sort of like, now this part is,
Yep.
here, but these other parts are like closed off now.
Yep.
um and I really also vibe with this whole like, oh, it's okay to be unprofessional, because I mean, I personally like my crusade is like I show up sometimes to coach in pajamas. Like sometimes you can see like what a mess my house is behind me. And there is always the fear that some people will be like, oh, that means this person doesn't know what she's doing. And I'm like, but I hope there's the person who's like, oh, it's okay to be this way. And it actually doesn't mean, anything.
Yeah.
um Other than like, we're all just human and we all just have like different styles and preferences. And
Yeah. Well,
um
and aside from the fact that I think the truth is perfectionism is colonialism. Like it's like a controlled, it's a way of controlling humanity to follow rules. And I think a lot of I was recently diagnosed with ADHD. I was known in kindergarten as the girl with the messy desk, and it made no sense to me because I could clean, and I was very put together, and I had good grades, and I wasn't jittery and running all over the place the way that I knew of what ADHD looked like as a kid. But I'm a female bearing ADHD. So it's all in my head. It's all complication and confusion and all the things, trying to figure out all the things all the time. And there's so much about me that had to work so damn hard to make my house look a certain way and to make a meal look a certain way. Um, and it's not that there aren't people who are built to do that. Like some people just love cleaning a house. It's just the most satisfying thing in the world. For me, it's torture. It feels like I'm abandoning myself, to be honest with you. Like it feels like it's not mine to do because it distracts me from what I'm here to do, which I think is more ethereal, is more vision, is more executing on things. And so the idea that it had to be perfect, it's not true for everybody. And there's a place and a time for systems and processes and step by step. But I think that's the world that has we've lived in fully for centuries. And now we're kind of starting to live into this world that is more about flow, and where is the energy and where is the space and what are the seasons and what's the flow of our, as females, our bodies, where are we in our cycle. And I think one of the things I learned as a mom pretty quickly is that we can be really efficient. We can get a lot done in a very short amount of time, some of it because we just have that amount of time, but also I think because that is kind of more of the feminine way. Is there are going to be moments where we are just on fire and we're getting stuff done and we're accomplishing, and then there are times where we just need to lay, I don't know if we're supposed to swear on here, but lay the fuck down and just curl up in a ball and sleep and rest. And that our society isn't built for that to be acceptable, right? Like that's we're it's like you have to be on all the time. And or the unity that I actually go to a unity in Boulder, and our minister was saying, there's, I forget where she got this from, but no, that's not where it came from. Megan Watterson, who wrote Mary Magdalene Revealed, which I recommend to everybody in the world to read, talks about how there is no evidence in nature that anything blooms all the time. Nature is, there's a dormancy period, there's a period for restoration, there's a period where there's a whole lot happening, but you see no evidence of it because it's happening under the soil. Then there's the blooming period. And then there's the kind of dying down period. And that's that's humanity too. That's human beings too. And we all have different cycles and different ways of operating. But the world tells us we're supposed to be on from 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, and then off in the evenings and off on the weekends. And, maybe if you're in school, off for the summer and off for 2. But other than that, it's just be on. And I think that's another place where entrepreneurship is going to already is changing that, because I think when you have people working from home, you start to get efficient, you start to get more done, and yes, there's that, like, it's all everything's bleeding into each other. And we always talk about, you know don't bring your work home with you, but also don't bring your family to work with you. And is that really what we need? Or is more of what we need is that we just do get the downtime and we get to kind of meld all of those different parts of ourselves in a way that can seem overwhelming, but also informative. We're learning from our children how to behave in business. We're learning from our children what we want to make in the world. We're learning from our businesses how to make systems that work so that our households run more smoothly. Um, so I just think, again, and from people who have a spiritual practice, you learn from that how to be still and how to look for the internal. I think there's a lot of people in the spiritual realm who are really good at spirituality, but they do business totally differently than they do their spirituality. It's, business is like this, and you get this kind of, and you use words in marketing that compel people or take advantage of their fears or their scarcity mentality. um, oh, but I'm a really peaceful person and loving person when I show up to my spiritual center or do my yoga classes. And so that's where I'm like, your spirituality can inform how you do your business too. And your business can inform how your spiritual practices and your connections to people can be more effective, right? And more productive. So yeah, all that to say, and this is not, by the way, this is not who I was my whole life. Like, I went to college, went studied business, worked for the Gap as a buyer for 7 years, and was working 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. And it broke me, totally broke me. Could I have kept doing it? Maybe, but I think my body had this wisdom of, this is not yours to do. There's nothing wrong with what you're doing. It's just not for you. Um, and so in contrast, building this business has been about flow, has been about what's in integrity with how I want my family life to look. Um, I don't need to be working 9 hours a day. Some days I do. Some days I work 12 hours, and with joy, because it feels really good and I feel like I'm accomplishing what I want to accomplish. But there's other days where I work 2 hours. Um, and that again came out of necessity because I couldn't handle anything else when this all came about. And it turns out to be the system by which we lead this business is by flow and energy, and yeah, and saying no to the things that feel like they won't be in integrity.
So I feel like a lot came up while you were talking. One of the things that I was really appreciating is this like diversity of how different people are in their energy and in their work. And I think that's why, like in my work, I really like working with human design and astrology, because it can kind of help us see that, like, yeah, actually, this homogenous framework of, like you were mentioning, like we work 9 to 5 and then we have these like prescribed rest periods. Honestly, like most people do not work like that. And I think the other thing that's really interesting is, like, work rest cycles can be very different for each person, and they can evolve too, like depending on what year of life that we're in. So I think
Yeah.
our culture really likes homogeneity and certainty, and that's why it tries to impose this on everyone. But I think the truth is, like, sometimes, especially if you're transitioning from like one way of working and resting into another, it can feel like really wrong or bad to kind of not know for sure or have it be changing like day to day, moment to moment.
Yep.
Um, the other thing that I really appreciated that you kind of touched on was this like cross pollination model, which I think also can sometimes kind of be seen as unprofessional. Like, if you're a photographer, like you market the way photographers do, and
Yeah.
if you're like on Wall Street, like whatever. But I think what's beautiful about creating community and co-working is like you can talk to other people who do things very differently than you and like get inspired and get ideas. And
Yep.
I think the last thing that I just wanted to kind of reflect and remark on is this idea of how like a lot of marketing is very like actually violence based. Like you are like intentionally trying to dysregulate someone or point out a flaw. And I think I don't know what the language is like around how we try to justify that or, like, but I do think at the end of the day, honestly, it is very violent. And I also think like in a lot of ways, and they're so normalized that we wouldn't necessarily attach the word violent to them, but the way that we expect people to show up in society, especially mothers, is
Yes,
incredibly violent and children too, I will say.
absolutely. 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 And that's the thing is that the world of marketing, and again, that's what I studied in college, is about manipulating people. It's about controlling their thoughts to a point where they make the decision to spend money on whatever it is that you are selling to benefit you. And maybe there's a benefit to them. Maybe it is the right thing for them, but that's not the point of marketing. The point of marketing is to sell to as many people as you can. I went from when we moved to Southern California and I left the retail world, I went into the elder care world because I was like, I need something that's heart centered. And I've always loved the elderly and I feel like there's something I could do there. But it was in marketing. And guess what? My job was to tell people, oh, your mom fell and, too many times, you should have her move in here. Meanwhile, these are people who probably couldn't afford the building that I was trying to tell
Mm.
them to move into, but we were offering these great deals. So for a year, you're going to be able to live here, and no mention of, but after a year, you're going to have to figure out how to pay another $500 a month to keep her here, 1,000. It broke my soul to do it. So I
Yeah.
did it for, again, as long as I could, and then moved on. And that's what marketing does is, um, in the traditional sense, is like convince people to buy things. And we've been using the services of Clorinda Brant, who does a program called Decolonizing Your Business that I took a class in, and she's amazing. But her whole thing is about marketing in a decolonized way, and really the antithesis to all of the selling for fear is storytelling. It's just storytelling. It's not a new thing. It's the way that sales happened long ago before colonization happened, telling the story of what your experience was with a certain product, telling the story of what your experience was of, being in a certain group or something, so that if it touches somebody in a way that they innately connect to, they want it. If it doesn't, then they move on. They might be inspired, it might bring something else up in them, but it's not about buying your product, and it's about asking permission, to sell to them, and we're still figuring out what that looks like for us. We've had conversations with some of our staff when sales have been down, like, okay, what does closing look like, right? Like, how is that process going? And a lot of times it's, well, they weren't quite ready to pay, so we told them just to come back when they're ready. And so I invited them to think like, I don't want you to convince anybody to buy something they don't want, but you just gave a tour to someone who had tears in their eyes because of how much they knew they needed what this space is, because of how much they felt at home here. We all know what happens to our mom brains when we leave something that's inspiring and the kids screaming in the back seat and they don't sleep all night. You start to forget. You start to forget that's something that I needed. So what if we think about it as, invite them to sign themselves up today? Doesn't mean they have to come today. Doesn't mean they can't change their mind, but invite them to say yes to the thing that moved through their body in a way that felt in integrity, and you saw that and you experienced that from them, so that they don't have to make the decision again down the road. They don't need to remember this and come back to it. That would be a form of like utilizing the storytelling, and like it still sounds manipulative. I still have a hard time even saying the words like, well, remind them that they had a good time, because it sounds like sales strategies that I've learned in the past. But the reality is, you saw that, like, and it's different if they can't afford it and we don't know how to make that, overcome that. If it's that they really don't know that the hours are not going to work, like, that's a different story. But when it's someone who's like, I need this, we know how hard it is as moms to say yes to the things that we need the most, because we want to prioritize our kids and that we just get distracted. So what does it look like to provide them with a gift of not having to make this decision all over again? um yeah, so it's real tricky, right? Like, we do have ebbs and flows in sales, and honestly it rarely is because something marketing wise has gone wrong, or something in the space has gone wrong, or there's questions of staff, or it's not that. It's an energy. It's usually like there's a lack sense happening in the space, and so therefore people are reading lack, and they're reading, oh well, they really want me to join, and that means they must not be doing well, and that means, this is probably not a good space. um and that's hard, and it's hard to teach. It's hard for people to understand. um but it's like one of the things we get to explore in this type of business is, how do we do things that feel in integrity with our own personal values? And most of us don't have the value of manipulation. Right, we don't. So how can we just avoid doing that and making anybody do that, if it doesn't feel in integrity?
Oh my
uh,
God. Sorry, am I interrupting you?
no, no, no.
Okay. I feel like there is a lot of juice here. And I feel like this could be a really productive conversation to have because I know a lot of moms are really interested in entrepreneurship, not because it's fucking hard, which it is, but because there's that promise of like, oh, I get to create my culture and my hours and um like make this work for me and my family.
Mhm.
And I do think as moms kind of like circle that or contemplate that, and also for people who are active entrepreneurs like me and you, there is for sure this question of like, how do I do this in integrity? Like, how do I swim upstream with like in abundance, integrity based business in a whole like culture where everyone else is using these like more intense tactics, like,
Yep.
and what was the thing that I was going to say? I think the other thing that I really want to talk about and hear your thoughts on is exactly what you were saying, where like a mom will come through the space and you will just see that it's like exactly in a completely non like manipulative or projective way. Like this is like what this person needs. But then I also feel like with so many people, there is this kind of dissonance where either they need something that's like really external and tangible to fix the problem, like that's just what our culture is like just consume more, buy more. Like, you'll feel better if you remodel your kitchen. Like you'll feel better if your house has more square footage. Like, like it's that sort of thing that we think is really going to fix stuff. And then
Yeah.
I've also found like for moms especially, it's actually really hard to invest in ourselves. And for some reason it is like, oh, the manicure is only like $10, so I can afford that. Versus like this other investment,
Yeah.
like on such a deeper level will support me, but it's like a little bit outside of my threshold of like what I think I'm worth. And it's
Yeah.
all very unconscious.
It is.
So that for me is something I'm constantly thinking about because I do want to be in integrity. So I don't want to like shame people around like, oh, like this is like an unconscious thermometer around your worth but at the same time, I'm like,
No.
there's so many pieces in place that you think you can't afford this, but like maybe you're just prioritizing things that. So anyways, I could go on and on, but I'm curious your thoughts about everything I said.
No, I think that last point is a really tough one, because because I don't know how you show somebody their work, like, especially when what you're offering is something that might be helping them to find their worth. How do you convince them you're worth investing in your worth that you don't yet have access to yourself? And I don't know. I really don't know. I mean, I think, yeah, there's just so much around worth in our culture that, I mean, I think it's behind most problems, right? Most violence, most war, most addiction. Like, it's just, there's something that has happened to where we just question, are we worthy, just as we are with all of our flaws? And I do think a lot of it is because of a patriarchal and perfectionistic culture, that it's like you can't live up to that. And when the marketing becomes about showing you the unachievable and yet somehow convincing you it's possible to get there, and then you buy the thing, and then you read the book, and then you listen to the guru, and you're still not there, well, then it's like your worth is even lower because you've done the things. um you mentioned something about, oh, when we were talking about someone walking through the door and like feeling really alive and, emotional about what they need. um Again, I think sometimes the problem is truly just because we do not have community. We don't have people in our lives on an everyday, every hour basis reminding us of who we are and mirroring how powerful we are. We live in such an isolationist culture that, we don't have those constant external reminders. Not that we want to rely on external reminders, but it does help to have people around you who see you and appreciate you in all of your flawed forms. And I think that's where sometimes the answer to all the problems is not the buying the things, and it's just community. And that's a really hard thing to say, because I know very well, and we all do, that community is just not available to us without effort, without work, without going and looking for it for most people, right? There's a lot of still, kind of more traditional cultures that it's just built in that family lives together and family lives close, and that's where that village comes from. But most of the world, and again, on purpose to control and to keep us from becoming the powerful human beings that we're meant to be, where we live isolationist lives. So, it's, again, it's like when you're, there's not very many times where I have said, I'm going to go on a trip by myself because I know I need that. And it would be really good for me to have some alone time. And it always would. But if friends say, hey, let's go on a retreat together, let's go do this thing, it's just that much more of an incentive to do the thing that I knew I needed, that I knew. And part of that is that my friends are going to be there. That's going to make it fun. But it's really about, like, what are the things that we keep ourselves from doing because we don't have other people with us when we do those things. And I think that's been the beauty of the village is, oh God, I mean, it's, people are talking all the time about what's hard, right? And what's challenging. And sometimes that might sound like, well, that's just a bunch of whining. No, it's not whining. It's expressing the things that if we don't say out loud, start to eat us alive. I'm not sleeping. My kid won't stop sleeping, or won't sleep. I feel pissed at my child, or I don't like my kid very much right now. These are all things that we all think. But if no one else around us is saying those things and we feel like we're a terrible person, I'm a terrible mom because I don't like my kid right now, or I want them to leave for a week and I don't care where they go. We all think those things. But the same thing about ourselves is, we're failing as moms. We're a terrible cook, a terrible housekeeper. If you don't have other people saying those things at the same time, then you internalize it. There's something wrong with me. And I need to fix that by, investing in this diet. I need to fix that by taking some pills, and not that any of those things are not necessarily helpful at specific times, but when it's about, I'm not okay without these, I'm not worthy without these purchases or this handbag that's going to somehow make my life that much more organized, right? Like, it's community, I think, that we're lacking the most, and that becomes the catalyst for all the other all the other things that go wrong. Um, yeah, but as far as like how to overcome that obstacle of someone needs something and they don't know how, they don't know invest in it. I don't know the answer to that. And I think a lot of people in this world of trying to make the world a better place are the ones who are questioning that the most. Like, how do I increase my sales without making people buy things? How do I sustain my own personal finances without feeling that sense of lack, right? Without feeling that scarcity, like, oh, I gotta hurry up, gotta get sales, gotta get sales up. I don't know, except that usually the answer doesn't come from that frantic place. Usually the solution doesn't come from that place of panic. It comes from the place where you calm yourself and recognize it's going to be okay and you're doing the right thing. And this business or this organization or this practice or this art is about more than me. And I know that because I can feel it in my bones. And so I just need to let it go. How it's all going to get better. Just know that it will. I don't know. And as
No,
you can continue to talk in circle.
so no, that I feel like that was helpful. And I feel like the one thing that's kind of coming, well, you said something really powerful, and I tried to write it down, but I probably already got it wrong, which is what are the things that we keep ourselves from doing because we don't have people doing them with us? And honestly, I feel like a lot of the stuff that I asked, like somewhat rhetorically, like I don't know that anyone has a great answer, but the answer just generally is community. Like, I do think when we're like isolated and separated, you're right. Like that is a fertile breeding ground for shame, which lowers our self-worth. And then it's this positive feedback loop of like a very negative result where like we just keep like feeling more shame, lower self-worth, more shame, lower self-worth. And I think even too, like community does help us invest in things that are meaningful and they can reflect back to us what it is that we most need without us like where we have blind spots around like self-worth or what we deserve and things like that. And the other thing I was thinking is, this kind of Western idea of like, I need to make more money so I can be more independent and more self-sufficient. And like, if there's scarcity or crisis, I will be able to take care of myself.
Yeah.
So it's this weird thing where like, we're actually making more money in order to be able to isolate more effectively, which is just the craziest thing ever. But I think that's what a lot of people do. And then it turns out like, oh yeah, like I can pay people to cook for me. I can pay people to watch my kids. But like when push comes to shove, is there is like a family crisis, or if there is something that just feels like even more chaotic, even like health wise, then like the money's not gonna help. And like what does help is community. And I actually, so not to co-op, like this is a conversation about you, but I distinctly remember like two phases in my life. One where I had like a thriving business and I was making a lot of money and I was able to hire help. Um, and closing that business down and starting this business that I currently have where my income, is not nearly quite so
Yeah.
ample. But what I really realized is like when I was wealthy, I had zero idea how to create community or be in community. And there was just like a lot of shame around, like, I have a lot of money. I shouldn't, people are not going to want to help me because they know that I have money or like all
Yeah.
this weird sort of thing. And so in this newer, like financial space, which is like such a euphemistic way to say, like, I make a shit ton less now. Um, it's I have actually found like community is more available and it has proven to actually be a more powerful and helpful resource than even money, which I think is what a lot of people really need to hear and awaken to in
Yeah.
this culture. Um, so I don't know if you have anything you want to add or respond to, but
No, I think a really, really, really good point. And I think what I would like to see from that, which we've not yet experienced at the village. Again, we're a co-op. So the idea is that when we do really well, everybody that comes to the village that is a member will get a share of the wealth. Like it's community wealth building. That's like, it's not all going to come to me. It's going, we're democratic. We all own one share of the business. So I there's something about this business that is still in this full belief faith state, not proven yet, that it actually can be creating financial wealth for everybody involved, right? Like there doesn't have to be the sacrifice of financial abundance in order to have that community and like personal fulfillment in life. But I think what it does take is realigning what it is you want to do with that wealth, right? Like there's a way that our society tells us, well, then you get wealthy, you buy a new car and you get a bigger house and you go on more fancy trips and you have, you know, a boat and you have all these things that are the symbols of when you become more and more wealthy. And what I think is true is that we can be wealthy, but if our wealth is about only creating personal abundance, making the image of what quote unquote wealth looks like, then we're still not going to be happy. So, you know, what does it look like to be in a state of, you know, the spiritual worlds talk about tithing, right? Like where you give a certain amount of what comes in, um, to whatever feeds you spiritually. If it's your church, if it's, you know, someone that you, what does it look like to keep circulating? Or is it, you know, giving, although, yeah, I was going to go down a path of nonprofits, but that's a whole nother thing that I'll get real wound up about. Um, but like, what does that mean to be wealthy in a way that it is also fulfilling in not just a material way. And I do believe we can get there where we can be doing the things that we're here to do, serving the way that we're supposed to, creating what needs to be created, providing the solutions that the world's looking for. And that doesn't mean we have to be um, struggling financially. I think there's a way to do that, but it involves community. It involves creating that it's not about just this does well, I do well, right? Like a corporation wants all the businesses within a building that it owns, they want them to do well, but not because it serves those individual businesses, because it makes the profits bigger and because shareholders get excited about that. So how do we change that to where it's like, if I own the building, like I really am invested in how much success comes in the businesses that are, you know, renting that building, so that it's affordable to them. They want to live, they want to be there long term. And then maybe there is, rather than higher rent, it's like you tithe to each other because you're all a part of each. I don't know. I don't know what it looks like, but I think our system is so set up that there's going to be a people who are going to make it and they're going to make it big, but it's never going to be about how is the whole community fed by your success as a business. Um, and I believe it's possible. I mean, I think one of the things, like we've got some long-term visions for this business, but the true long-term vision is it's not needed anymore, that it is obsolete because we live in a world that does naturally rely on community and creates community in a way that we are all cared for. Um, and I'm always in the Pollyanna land of, you know, oh, the best things are going to happen and it's going to get great. And I don't know how long that's going to take and if I'll see it in my lifetime. But I think what's beautiful is it has not taken very long for people to start seeing that they can do life a different way and that business can be done in a way that feels really in integrity and that it can be benefiting everybody who, you know, had to sacrifice to get us where we are. I mean, how, what, like the world of reparations and land back, and there's so much that we can do that would make what we're individually doing on the land that we live and work on be even more fruitful to us by being in integrity to where it came from and honoring and giving to yeah, to the to what made what we do now possible, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well,
It doesn't.
It's interesting because since I have just so recently finished braiding sweetgrass, like a lot of the lessons are still really present for me. And I
Yeah.
remember this one part in the book where she talks about um, how, like, what a status symbol of wealth was in Indigenous community. And like the status symbol that like let everyone know that you were wealthy and that you had wealth was how generous you were. And so that is how you communicated, but also shared is like the more that you had, the more that you were able to share. And I thought that was really beautiful. And I often am like have these deep wonderings about how we got to like where we are and like why we're doing things this way. And I think a lot of it too like just comes down to like a lack of trust that you'll be supported like when you run out or like when you do enter a period of scarcity. And so there is very much this like building slash hoarding kind of mentality. And I think it can be really interesting to play with that edge of like, oh, like even if I run out, I'm creating a life or I'm creating a reality for myself where like I know it will flow in somehow, or there's like someone I can reach out to or someone who will notice that will like um kind of support me. And I think
Yeah.
I actually think of like my own financial situation a lot where I am existing on savings. So like I do have money, but there is the fear that like, and I don't have a lot coming in, so I need to hold on to this. But I often think of like, what if I could just really operate in this mode of like, when I need it, it will flow in. And how much would that free up my savings to flow out to people in need?
Totally. Yeah. It's a really interesting dynamic. I mean, like you use the word trust, like we don't trust that we're going to be okay. And again, it's because we live in this isolated world, right? Like I grew up in, I was where family was lower middle class. We lived in a cute little cul-de-sac where all the neighbors knew each other. And, there was this safety that was inherent in the fact that we as little teeny kids could go running through the streets and go into the woods in the back and nobody cared. And partly, yes, we didn't have cell phones and our parents, it was a different world. What's different now is not that it's a more dangerous world. It's not a more dangerous world. It's that everyone is so focused on their own lives, partly because of the expense to live. You can't, most households need everyone to be working, not just two jobs, but you're so exhausted by those jobs or you're working late into the night that there's no time to get to know neighbors, and neighbors aren't home. The elders are working. They're not just home and retired at 55 like when I grew up. And so because you don't know them, you don't trust them, and then you build fear around them. And then, the fact that I can't let my kids run through the streets, with if I do, I have a pit in my stomach and am nervous the whole time. We don't live in a more dangerous world. We live in a world that we don't know what's going on around us because everything has become out of, yes, some of it is out of greed of like, I want more because I want a bigger house or whatever. But a lot of it is because it's just required in order to survive,
Mm.
that most people need to be working so much that they don't, or hauling their kids to, 4 or 5 activities, because if they don't, they're not going to be able to go to get scholarships to go to college, and then their world will be over. It's like this whole idea that I don't know when it stops. It doesn't, right? Because now people in their 70s are having to 80s are still having to work to survive.
Yeah.
So then we don't know each other. And then we don't build trust. And then we don't learn to let go of, I got to keep going, keep climbing that ladder, or it's all going to fall apart and no one's coming to save me. No one is coming to save us. But we could all come in and save each other if we would let go of this idea that's about all of us individually making it, right? Like there's plenty. It's plenty for us to all be okay. It's just not, I don't want to use the word it's not, it doesn't feel safe. It doesn't feel safe, and it feels like it's ours or it's not ours. It doesn't feel like it's collective ours. Yeah.
Well, I think not only does it not feel that way, I mean, I think it is genuinely, there are powers that be that are like,
Yeah.
absolute, the way you feel is the way that we are making it,
Yep.
Um, so, which is really sad. And which brings me to a kind of the direction that I want to move with this conversation, which is like, um, so if people are interested in like defying the culture or creating community for themselves or creating like, like a sustainable, integrated work, life, childcare community situation for themselves, like where do they start? Like, what advice do you have do you have for people? And especially like what troubleshooting do you have for people when like I think everyone's kind of had this experience because like, people aren't dumb. Everyone is like, yeah, a village would be more helpful. I need to create a village. And then there's an attempt to create a village and it can often just be so discouraging based on what you said. Like people are so busy, people are so in survival mode. So what advice or like kind of what can you share around that?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. So there have been organizations that do similar things to what we do, co-working and childcare. That's not happening. Um, but most since we started, we've looked at kind of competition and what kinds of organizations have existed. The majority of them either have gone out of business or are charging fees that are similar to a traditional childcare. And so it's literally not allowing people any of the lower economic levels get in. And it's full time and it's not, ours is flexible drop in and all that. Um, but I think one of the things that we learned is our bread and butter. And part of it is because we're a co-op, and part of it is just because of our culture is um, people just have to be able to come together as they are, right? Without figuring out how are we going to do all of this, right? Like we had a family who came once and were like after a while like, oh, this is more expensive than we're comfortable with, and we think we can do something like this on our own, like just create a people do this childcare co-ops that are just more traditional, like maybe we pay a childcare provider and we share the cost of them, or we just all take turns watching each other's kids. Like that is a really beautiful way of creating community in the parent world of like, let's just get 5 or 6 families together and we just each get a day where the kids are all at our house. And, yes, that day will be really hard, but um, at the end of the day, I think it's really about people showing up as they are, because we all are really good at certain things and really not good at other things. And I know for this business, like I'm very good at having big ideas. I'm really good at having like holding on to faith and hope. I'm really good at the values. I'm not as good at executing, little things. And so when we started this business, again, I wasn't getting paid because of where we were and financially. And we had again co-founder Emily joined us later, and she came in to use the space herself, and she's like, I love this so much. How can I help? How can I be a part of this? And it turned out she ended up being again, she's still with us. She's still doing all of our marketing, and she just
Buzzer.
started her skills to the table. And she waited a while to get paid, and then finally she was paid. So we're in this place of like, if you feel passionate about something, bring what it is about you, that skill, that the skills, the talents, the interests, right? That's important, because if people aren't interested in something, they're not going to be good at it. um, and be with more people who come from all different walks of life. I think sometimes just putting and that's how this all started. I put out an idea on Facebook. I'm disappointed that this business that we've been using to take care of each other is closed. What do we do? Who's interested in talking? And just having those conversations about what is it that we need, because there are people who need to actually physically live together, right? There's I know several moms who have become single parents, and they move in, 3 single moms and their kids all rent a house together, because that's what they need, is the everyday we are together doing this lifing together. There's other people who just need a couple hours here and there. Like I'm an introvert, and I need a lot of alone time. So for me, I just needed a space where I could be for a couple hours, where I had time away from my kids and in community. But I want to come back to my little house by myself at the end of the day. That's just how my nature. Um, I think it really doesn't take a whole lot to take an idea in community and do something with it. And some people, I know I've heard of a couple different places that are trying to build an arts based kind of like community or family village type space where it's not about entrepreneurship so much, it's more about art. So bringing all kinds of the tools and the right lighting and canvases and recording studios, so that more artistic based families can come together. It's like, find the thing that you think you need and just put it out in the world. I know it, when I was at this state, I wanted someone to tell me the formula. This is what you do. Step one, do this. Step two, do this. Step three, do. And the reality is there isn't one. It's just um, put yourself out there with the thing that you think you need, and the type of village you need, the type of community that you need, because it might just be your own neighborhood. We moved into our home a couple years ago, and I realized I don't know most of the people in my neighborhood, and it is actually on me because I haven't gone door to door and said, hey, how many other people are the same way? I would love to know my neighbors, and I don't, because I haven't made the effort, and neither has anybody else. And some people might need it more based around a belief system, or an educational system, or around meals. I mean, honestly, so many parents talk about, like, could we just make meals at the village so that we can all go home with dinner ready to go? And we haven't done it, but it's on the list of things to do. But those are things that I think, simple little thing. We all sit and cook by ourselves in our homes to make meals to have for our individual families. Why can't we do it together? That's how Indigenous culture, I mean, honestly, creating meals together is therapy. That is therapy for Indigenous cultures. I always talk about the story of this book someone told me about. I don't remember any of the details, except it was about a scientist that was going to remote villages to study them and to talk to people. And he showed up at this one village, and they were all excited. You're here. We have an inventor. We want to introduce you to the inventor. And all right, now let's go. I want to show you the invention. And the invention is this machine that essentially, I don't know anything about agriculture, but it's like shucking corn. Is that a appropriate term? But like, helping prepare food is what this machine did. And the scientists, like, or the uh, yeah, I guess scientist was like, well, that's super interesting, but this is in a shed, completely covered in dust. So is it broken? Like, why are you guys not using it? You're clearly not using it. And they said, oh, no, no, we used it for a while, but we stopped because the families that were sitting around the campfire doing that very same task individually before missed spending time together. And so they wanted to do it themselves rather than having this machine do it. And to me, that is like the heart of where we've gone wrong in society, is that because we're not doing things together, tasks are painful rather than healing. Making meals together is a healing experience, is a therapeutic experience sometimes. But we just all feel like we got to do it on our own. We got to be all have to be individual chefs in our own homes. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know if I'm like romanticizing old world stuff that I don't actually know a lot about, but what you're saying reminds me of this show that is on Netflix, and I think it's called Cable Girls, but it's about
Hmm.
when like telephones first were invented and they needed like the telephone operators to run the switchboards, which like I think completely out of context, you're like, that is such like a mind-numbing job. Like it doesn't actually even exist anymore because technology is so advanced. But like at the time, what it represented for women was like financial freedom and a job opportunity to be able to do something besides be trapped in the home, completely dependent on their husbands. And so there was like a huge level of excitement. But also, what really struck me about this, like the whole show is about the relationships between these women. So like, yes, they were doing this like boring thing, but like the work was made so much lighter and so much funner and so much more meaningful. Like it wasn't even about them loving the job. It was about them loving their like coworkers and the family that they had created
Yes.
at
Yeah.
work. So I think about that a lot. Like I think about like, we have created these modern conveniences where we have like a dishwasher to do the dishes and a laundry machine to do the laundry.
Yeah.
But like when women did that before these technologies were available, they did it together and the work was made light because they were like gossiping and talking at the same time and just being
Yeah.
in community.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And again, those things that were made to create convenience, they're only convenient if you spend the time you would have been doing that enjoying life. But
Mhm.
most of the time it's keeping us busy, letting us work harder, letting us work at our jobs for longer hours. It's not, oh, now that I have a dishwasher, I can, leave the house and go on a hike. I mean, for some people, that's probably true. But for most of us, the time that we're saving with these tools that are useful are really just allowing us to work that much harder to end up having the money to buy more of the tools that are going to make us lives easier, which really leads to working even harder and isolating even more. And I agree with this. Like, okay, there's probably some romanticism about there's a lot of romanticism about the past, but I think the least wise thing you do at any point in time is not take into account where there was wisdom from the past, right? Like, I think sometimes it feels like, oh, it's the olden days, we don't want that. There are a lot of things we definitely do not want from the olden days, and particularly depending on who you are, right? Like, there's women in particular, anyone that's BIPOC, any LGBTQ, like, we don't want to go back to any of that from a social perspective. But some of the wisdom of what community looked like is really powerful, and we have not learned to reintegrate some of that, right? Like, it's okay that we walk too far into individualism. That's okay, as long as we recognize we went too far and now it's time to come back to something that looks more sustainable, which is, community based and community with each other as human beings, but also with our planet and all of our natural resources. um, we maybe we swung the pendulum too far, and now I think we're starting to bring it back, and we're still going to learn and we're still going to make mistakes, but I think there's a lot that's really becoming clear about how the way we've created life to be over the last, several decades is it's not healthy, it's not sustainable, it's not we're not okay with it anymore, and we have to be able to pick up and make that new world. And I think, entrepreneurship is a beautiful way of creating that new world and stepping into there's your bee.
There's my wasp, my little
uh,
friend.
is it just one in there?
So, not to go off on a tangent, but apparently August is the time of, or like fall, like summer to fall transition is the time of the year where some of the workers for some reason get kicked out of like the hives. And so then they get like really sad and frantic and hungry, and they get like especially scroungy around like scraps and picnics and sugary smells. So I think when I open my door, because this is the time of the year, there's like we have Torani syrups in our kitchen because my partner likes to do like his vanilla latte. And that's like their number one favorite thing is like they just go and they like go to the syrup dispenser. But I also think like just in general, they're kind of disoriented and just maybe more like curious or just like what the hell is going on than normal.
Ugh,
So they come in, they fly around, sometimes they fly out, sometimes I find their little carcasses. But I like to have the door open for like
yeah.
fresh air and energetic sort of cleansing. So yeah,
Mhm.
I have visitors because of it.
This is totally off tangent, except that it's just experiencing the animal world differently, because I just had a little heart palpitation for these poor wasps that I've been, swearing at for the last couple of weeks. They're kicked out of the nest. That's so sad. Have you
Yeah.
heard the story why about like this pigeons, like why pigeons gather in cities and
Mm-mm.
towns? So pigeons were like useful, right? They were at one point
Carrier.
carrier pigeons,
Yeah.
right? But they were pets, right? They were domesticated. So they were in people's homes and like I don't know what kind of relationships they built, but they had purpose and their purpose was completely around human beings. Well, because of evolving of the world and now we have mail and now we don't need carrier pigeons anymore, nobody wants them anymore. So it's essentially like we have domesticated pigeons and now we reject them from our lives. And all they know is they need humans to survive. So that's why they hang out in cities and busy places because that's just what they're.
Yeah.
Isn't that the saddest thing?
It is really sad. And I think about that a lot. Like speaking of community and just, kind of something that you were hinting at throughout this entire conversation is, expanding it beyond just like human community, but there's ways where we can be in community with things that are more than human, like
Yeah.
even in community with like, the business as its own like entity or that has its kind of own way of moving through the world. But like, also animals and plants and all sorts of things. So
Yeah.
yeah, I also used to be very just like, oh, wasps are terrifying. And then now I'm just like, oh, hey, little buddy, like you're really up in my space. But like it's no longer like necessarily a fear response. It's like de-escalated to just like a like discomfort or even like there's a tinge of humor there. So
Yeah.
um
Oh
yeah,
man.
I didn't know that about pigeons.
I didn't either. My friend told me about that a couple weeks ago.
Oh. So I feel like this might be a good place to begin to wrap, and I kind of want to hear if there's anything. Well, I always like to, speaking of stories and storytelling, like, is there a story that feels like really relevant or helpful to share that you want to share? Is part A. And then part B is like, is there anything that you were hoping that we would talk about that we didn't get to, or any kind of loose ends that you want to circle back to? And then part C would just be, yeah, tell us about what you've got going on, how people can find you. And I can remind you of those parts.
Sure, sure. Yeah. Well, gosh, one of my favorite stories about the village was several years ago. There was a room in this was our second Longmont space. There was a room that we called the community coop because it was kind of the place that you'd hang out, you get work done, but also was just going to be more chatty. And Emily, one of our co-founders, walked in and someone said, "Oh, Emily, how are you doing today?" And she just goes, "Bitchy," because she was just in a mood and she just named it. And someone else in the room just goes, "Yay." And it was this like, this is what it means to show up as we are, right? Like it was not, she was celebrating the fact that not only was Emily letting herself be known and seen in that moment for being cranky, but it was worth celebrating because that's the truth of who we are. We celebrate mostly when people are happy and there's good news and there's something great to happen, but there's also good that comes from that crankiness. And this whole business was built because I was cranky, because I was pissed. I was mad enough to say, I need something that doesn't exist. So watch out, world. We're going to fucking make it happen. I don't know what it's going to take, but we're making it happen. And I think we do a really good job as a society of telling you that it's not okay to get cranky. It's not okay to get mad. It's not okay to show emotion because that takes other people out of their happy emotions if you're showing sadness. And the thing is, anger moves. Anger makes change happen. There's never been a movement that has done significant change to this world that hasn't started from someone getting really mad, right? And it's a really good catalyst. So I like to name that, which is such a weird story to name as like one of the pivotal moments of the business, but it is because what else are we pissed out off about? That if the right people coming together get mad enough and take that and turn it into what we call sacred rage, like not like we're not going to destroy things. We want to like go into our heart space with that anger and ask ourselves, what am I going to do with this? What is it that needs to happen? What is mine to do here? And, we've all been able to be ragey at the village, and always it becomes either that clears something out of us or it helps us to see what's the next thing for us to do. So I'm all here cheering for anyone that can own. They're bitchy, they're cranky, they're mad. Like we deserve to be that, and we need to be that to make change in the world.
Oh my gosh, I love that. I think that is kind of part of capitalism slash, oh, I froze. Hold please. Um, Sometimes I just have to restart my video to unfreeze myself. But I do this work a lot with parents actually around like nervous system. And there's this misconception that like if you have a healthy nervous system, like you're just calm all the time. And what I've actually found working with parents and with kids is like a healthy nervous system is way more emotional than like what our culture is currently comfortable with. And I think part of why we've gotten into this culture of like repressing emotions or like being uncomfortable with emotions is that they just aren't efficient. Like they take time to metabolize, and
Yes.
and it's just like another way of making us like more robotic and more productive is just to be like when you have an emotion you just have to repress it, like it's not okay to express that here. But to your point, I have found like when we are actually able to engage with our emotions more productively, it actually frees up energy, it frees up life force, it frees up creativity, like exactly what you said. So
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, so it was really beautiful. What about, is there anything that we didn't get to that you want to talk more about or like tie up?
I just feel the need to mention my other co-founder, Nikki, who has been with the business from the beginning, and she is, she is someone. So I am someone who came from a pretty traditional business background, and she came from a military background. And so the fact that I'm a business person, Nikki is, again, military background, and then Emily has always been in the realm of healing and, some more on the science end of things. And um, Nikki has always kind of been the person who just is the steadiness of the business. And I realize I haven't told any stories about her, so I just want to name how much she's meant to us. And she was actually on the original pre-opening committee 6 months before we got the business open. And she's now, just because the business goes in ebbs and flows, she's now a single mom and needs to have more steady income. So she's working in the school district now. But she is as fiery about this business now as she was when she was doing it full time every day. So I just had to name how important it is that, and again, like the three of us shared the job of running this business for the first several years. Like it was, yes, we all had different titles, but we just shepherded it together. And I think from an entrepreneurial perspective, that's another one of our biggest lessons. It's not just build community, it's do your work in whatever way makes sense in community, so that you always have people to hold you accountable, and also have people there when you just need time off. I just took a couple days off last week because I could tell I just needed a reset of just not thinking about things, and they were able to hold the business for me while I was gone. And that's been the way we've made it this far, because we weren't requiring ourselves to be as financially sustainable personally, because we had the support, and we don't have to take care of our own kids all the time, and our kids got to be friends, and we got to build our own little family running the business. So I felt like that was something I wanted to make sure I mentioned.
Aw, yay, Nikki's in. I love that. I love the integrity of just wanting everyone to be like named and given credit and stuff. And it does just also keep bringing me back to this. For me, I mean, I'll re-listen to this, but I feel like at this point, this is kind of one of the most impactful things that I'm really going to take forward with me, which is this, like, I wrote it down. What are the things that we keep ourselves from doing because we don't have people doing them with us, and how community can give us like the resources, the space, and the support to create a business that isn't so like profit first. Like I just need to make something that makes money, even if I have to compromise like everything about myself and blah, blah, blah. But also like when we have more people with their unique zones of genius, like we can build something bigger than we could build ourselves. And also just this piece of like, it fucking sucks doing shit alone. Like it's so nice to just regulation and just like the ease of knowing like it's not your sole responsibility. So
Yeah. And I mean, there's so many times where we'll be working on a Google Doc to get, both, two people working on a Google Doc together, not on the phone, not, not actually working together, but in it together. And we'll just like type into whatever we're typing. Hi, Nikki. Hi, Emily. And just those little things. It's just like, I just think the human soul needs to be reminded it's not alone, and sometimes businesses require aloneness. I mean, you can't provide therapeutic services, with three therapists. I mean, you could in a room, but it's really more about how do you catalyze your ideas? How do you use them in the world? How do you get them out into the world? That I think that's where community comes in. Like you don't have to figure it all out. You can do your work that you do in, behind closed doors with clients. Like that is the work that you are here to do. But how can your business become something that is moved and shaped by more than just your own work? And I think that applies to pretty much everything that people do.
here, here. I agree. I'll also say, even for therapy, like I have had conversations with therapists where we're now, again, just, circling back to something that you said before, realizing like how important community is. And even like a client therapist relationship is very like isolated and fragmented from how you would normally move through the world. And I had a conversation recently with one of my therapist friends where she talked about like the importance of, sorry, I'm very distracted by my own face and I just froze again, of creating like group support and like group therapy in addition to just like this kind of one-on-one practice. So I
Yeah.
just wanted to throw that in there as well. Um, so how can people work with you? How can people find you? What do you want people to know about your work?
Yeah, so our website is familyvillagecoop.com. And again, we've got the 2.5 locations that all that people have to do is email. If you want to email me, my email is hello@familyvillagecoop.com, COOP.com.
We'll put it in the show.
What was that?
Oh, we'll put all the information in the show
Okay,
notes.
great. Okay, great. And really reach out, obviously, if the locations that we have are a fit for somebody to come and use those spaces, great, you can email me that way. But also if you have ideas, or if you live in a community that you feel like needs something like this, we are interested in growing. And the biggest challenge is getting startup capital, which we've now created a foundation to help do. So there is more of a method to being able to open more spaces in other locations. But even if someone doesn't want a village, but they just want an idea of how to build something similar, where we also do consulting services. So people can reach out and talk to us about how to do things, in the way that has worked for us, which is, again, pretty non-traditional. So it's good for people who are wanting to do, business in a way that looks different, that is not interested in raising $500,000 to, buy a new business, a new building. Like we don't have expertise there, but we have expertise in what building community can look like and doing business in a really win-win-win way. We're happy to talk to anyone who's interested in that.
Yay. This
Hey,
was a very inspiring and fun conversation. Thank you so much.
thank you so much for having me. This was a long time coming, and I am really honored that you were interested in what I had to say, and in this little business, a family village. It means a lot.
Aw, absolutely. I am actually like, I just feel like you've done something magical, and I am honored that you shared with us and that you even created this. So,
Thank you. Thank you. Well, so you have done something magical too in creating this podcast. So I'm grateful to be a part of it.